All right, folks, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Andrew, on stage.
Hello, everyone. You've probably heard about Amazon's working backwards from the customer. Today, I'm going to talk about something that I call learning backwards, an unconventional way of learning about AWS through trivia. So my ideas for this talk came from my kids. My kids really love reading. They really, really, really like to read. On the right, they were doing a reading assignment during 2020 when they were doing school at home, so that's how they chose to read. And on the left, there's my son. He's getting out some books from the public library there. Their favorite series of books is this series called National Geographic's Weird But True. And I think there's more than 49 in this book series, and I'm sure they've read them all several times. You can imagine these books, they're like a colorful, flashy web page, but in book form, so apparently they really like that. Some of the trivia that they told me, I just collected this over the course of just one day. I asked them for, what's the best trivia you read out of the books you're reading? So here's some of them. I think my favorite one is about box jellyfish having 24 eyes. I don't know if that's correct. I didn't verify the slide, but they told me all these things. Elephant ears weigh 100 pounds each. Wow. So all this led me to think more about, what are they reading? Why are they reading this? And do they actually learn anything from these trivia books? And should I really be pushing them towards more paragraph story books that are more, traditional? And then one day, I chatted with my daughter. She really loves ocean animals. And I talked to her about marine biology. And one thing I found, I was really surprised that she was able to take a bunch of the trivia that she learned about ocean animals and connect them with the things she learned in school, things like the history of the Earth, environmental problems in the ocean, things that face us all together today. So the Weird But True, I think, created this curiosity in her, and she built this mesh of knowledge that all went around those pieces of trivia. All this additional learning that came and started from those weird facts that I thought may have been useless, maybe it has some merit to it, because now, she'll really talk my ear off about ocean animals, marine biology, and not just those little facts, but, talk like someone who's really knowledgeable in the area would talk about it. So, wow, that's a 9-year-old. The Amazon Leadership Principles are a great set of documents. If you've never taken a look at them, I strongly would suggest doing it. This one is Amazon's leadership principle of learn and be curious. And part of this is that leaders are never done learning. Learning is never ending. It's the most critical thing you can do in your career, and the number one key to success in my mind. You have to have this growth mindset, always keep learning. No matter how long you've been in the industry, there's more and more to learn. But of course, there may be other motives. This is what my daughter said when I told her about this presentation. She said, I learned this stuff. I like these books because I like to prove other kids wrong. You have to work on your own motivation. So let's start with the intro again. Can I make this story more memorable for you all? I'm Andrew Shea. I'm an AWS community builder, and I'm a principal engineer at SmugMug and Flickr. together with my superhero coworkers that you see on the slide, we're building a better world through the power of photography. And also, we've been 100% powered in our infrastructure by AWS since 2013. In re:Invent's past, I talked about DevOps. I've talked about database migrations. So this is actually my 11th re:Invent. In the 2020 re:Invent, I actually did the AWS Trivia Bowl and finished second place. I've written a segment of AWS Keynote. That was a really exciting thing. But I generally don't do non-technical talks. So this, I thought, was a really good opportunity because for many engineers especially, the soft skills, these non-technical skills are where they can improve the most, and they'll really get a lot out of it. I'm hoping that more talks happen, especially in like this community track that'll help people with their soft skills. So this conference is super productive for me. All the different parts of re:Invent I listed here, and they all seemed kind of like traditional learning methods to me. So, so generally, traditional learning, you learn foundations, and you kind of work your way up to specifics. So I thought, all those foundations and working your way up, that's very similar to what you see in our keynotes. In the breakout sessions, you learn about those, and it's very traditional how you learn. Learn the basics and work your way up. There's a lot of learn by doing sessions, so those are your workshops, builder sessions. Probably my favorite sessions at re:Invent when I have time to make it to one. There's the Socratic method, which is like asking questions, talking to people about whatever you're interested in, and that's similar to Chalk Talks or even talking to vendors here. There's the DIY approach, all the blogs, docs, videos. AWS produces so many of them, often very high quality, so the DIY approach works for a lot of people. And finally, formal classes. So this is another thing that got me thinking about learning, is that in the last year and a half, my coworkers and I did a series of training courses in AWS. So these are multi-day, 4 to 5 hour a day courses. And these were the topics. They're all on machine learning and advanced development. And it got me really thinking about formal learning. And the big issue that I found was that I don't think it was just me, but some of us had not been to school in a long time. I think it's been 25 years for me. So I had a lot of trouble just like being able to keep up with our instructor's lectures. Our instructor was great, but keeping up with all the information, the work along the way, and for half an hour a day, or for 4 hours a day, that wasn't something that I was used to. So it got me really thinking about what approaches might work for non-traditional learners. So non-traditional learners are everywhere. My kids definitely fall in that category. There are a lot of people who are neurodiverse also. People with short attention spans, I feel like I'm falling into that category too. And then the category of people who just haven't done school for a while. So even though I really did a lot of school, it was so long ago that I was no longer in that mode anymore. But despite all this, our brains fundamentally work in the same way. So I got this from a research paper on how your brain is making connections. And basically, I looked at this and thought, hey, we're trying to make connections with our brain, and all of our learning is essentially the same. And what if the trivia were these points, and we could build our learning off of that? So the learning is the mesh that ties everything together. And what if the trivia we learn can actually be those points that get mapped together? It's possible. The other method of learning backwards that I was thinking about was with AWS certification. So I talked to some of my coworkers who were interested in this topic, and they said, yeah, I like learning by taking certifications. I try to see what's in the test and learn about that. And that's a similar method of learning backwards that really got me thinking about what works well and how this relates to how my children learn. So how do you learn backwards through trivia? Well, I think you start out with some really unusual and memorable trivia. You really want to think about things that are memorable. I'll provide a few examples that have worked for me. And that should help you to grow your curiosity. You might not know where and when that'll come up again, but it will if you learn enough of these just random facts about AWS. It'll come back, might not know when, and then eventually, hopefully, all that learning will lead to a new story. Maybe you'll get to a new place in your career or get a pretty big project based on what you learned through that process. So I said I'd give you some examples, and I'll start with a very unusual one. So this one is called Amazon S3 US Standard. Has anyone heard of US Standard before? OK, no one. So US Standard, you can see here, this is a AWS document. It's an older one, so don't use this for anything. But it's an older AWS document that talks about a US standard region. And wow, I took a look at this document. I think I saw it first in a report that AWS is writing. And I was wondering, why is it called US standard? Why isn't it in US East 1? And look at this. It's in Northern Virginia or the Pacific Northwest. What's up with that, right? So that kind of stuck in my head. At SmugMug, we've been using S3 since 2006. We were the very first enterprise customer of Amazon S3. I didn't join until 6 years later, but I saw this, and it really stuck out. The other thing that stuck out here is the different consistency models. Wow, this one has eventual consistency, while US West has read after write consistency. Why is that different? So that really stuck in my head, and I wondered, I didn't really understand it at the time. And it came back to me in 2013, we had a project to actually migrate out of Seattle. So Amazon was moving all the Seattle S3 things out back into Virginia. And some of my coworkers did that back then. I was mostly a manager and a DBA. So, I saw that and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But the funny thing that happened during that process is we found out about some of the network limits that AWS has across the country. And that also stuck in my head because, oh, that's unusual. You have limited amounts of bandwidth. You have limited amounts of operations you can run, especially back then. 2013 was very different than S3 is today. So today, all of this is not relevant because Amazon, I think last year, introduced strong consistency for S3, which is great because they're super customer responsive. That was one of the most important requests from us. So what happened after that? I got interested in topics around networking, data migration. Between this, we also rescued 2 other photo companies. And then in 2018, we acquired a very large photo provider called Flickr. And in that process, I was in charge of moving petabytes of data across the country. So I moved from, what is this US standard thing, and got to moving petabytes and helping to rescue one of the largest photo hosts that we have. A second example of learning backwards is this odd instance that I saw once in Jeff Barr. This is from Jeff Barr's blog post about this instance from 2014 called the C4 class of instances. So I saw this, and I was like, oh, C4 large has 2 vCPUs, each size doubles, and we see that in all the EC2 instances. But then in the C4.8x large, that had 36. What happened there? Did Jeff make a typo? But they actually had 36. We spun it up to check, and there were actually 36 vCPUs in that box. So that definitely stuck in my head. A few years later, we had a giant compression project where we wanted to go through all of our images and do lossless compression on them, just a saving storage volume project. And it stuck in my head, and we could save a lot of money because this project is all CPU bound. By using this, we basically got all the extra CPUs and saved a bunch of money. Also started using Spot to do this kind of one-time process. And after all that, this led me to get an interest in cost efficiency, making more things more efficient, and that's how I kind of got started in running the AWS part of our business. Prior to that, like our CEO did all that. We didn't even really look at the cost numbers. So big example of learning backwards from this unusual blog post from Jeff Barr to running SmugMug's AWS business. And the third example of learning backwards that I wanted to show you is this interesting chart, which is it's a chart of a Java JVM memory pressure from OpenSearch. And I looked at this, and I was wondering, hey, why is this chart going down? That doesn't even make sense. But wait a second. If I draw a line there, I can see that it's not actually going down. And I actually posted this chart on social media, and the internet famous world expert in optical illusions. He's actually a researcher who studies this stuff. His name is Akiyoshi Kitoaka, and he told me this was a Zollner illusion. So I just thought that was a fun piece of trivia. So being the year of Gen AI here, I had to include this slide. It's kind of a half-baked theory, but I wonder about today's large language models and wonder if they learn the same way. So we feed them a ton of source material, high quality if we can, source material that tries to get mapped into whatever the model is using. And the models do large-scale analytics of all that data it's fed, and somehow gets out a prediction model of what should come next. And I was thinking, is that the same way that my kids are learning? Are they learning these bits of trivia and connecting them, and then, and then it starts looking like actual learning? So that's why, in this half-baked theory, maybe the large language models look like they're learning in the same way that our children are making all these connections, learning backwards. And is that true? I'm not sure, but it's something to think about in how our Gen AI models work. So I want to finish on where we can find some interesting AWS trivia. So all the blogs and docs from AWS are super interesting. I really like the quotas and limits, because you can look at those numbers and wonder, why are some of these values changeable? Why can you request larger numbers? Why are some fixed? And that really reflects back on how the services actually work. The pricing pages are another interesting source of unusual trivia. I showed you that C4 8x large, but there's also, I won't say which instance type it is, but one of the high performance computing models, regardless of what instance size you choose, it is the same cost per hour. So there's an interesting piece to take with you. The more you read all this AWS trivia, the more it'll stick in your head. So keep on reading all this. And of course, my favorite source of AWS trivia are all the people here. So our reInvent attendees, everyone has an interesting story to tell. At the second reInvent I went to in 2014, I met a salesperson who actually sold Apple their first exabyte of storage with S3. So I was like, wow, that's a pretty cool piece of trivia. So keep talking to everyone here, whether it's your peers, people in the booths, AWS team members. In the community, there's a lot of great examples of people who talk about little bits of information all the time, like Corey Quinn, our cloud economist, Scott Piper, who talks a lot about security and tracks changes over time, and of course, our AWS community builders and heroes who are all around here. So make sure you chat with us after this talk. So what's the most obscure trivia you know about AWS? You can share it with me or post it to social media. And thanks a lot for joining me today. I'll be around the corner here if you want to chat later. And please fill out your session survey. I'll read them all. Thank you.